Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Julie's Orchids. Um, Today we're going to do a little bit of repotting, and this is sort of in follow-up to yesterday's video where I've been noticing that some of my orchid bark in my pots wasn't the best to begin with, and now has just degraded to the point of smelling really bad. Now this goes for our orchids, and here we have a Frag Kovachii with Frag Carnivorous. This one grows really good. I just watered it yesterday, and as you can see there, it's already drank all the water from that. So this one is really, really a thirsty little plant. And another plant that I have that is smelling funky but is making new root growth and doesn't seem to be as much of a water hog as that one yet is that right there. And then the last thing we're going to do is my first ever repot of a carnivorous plant. This is one of the first carnivorous plants I got. I got it from a company here in Western Australia, and it is a Drosera capensis. And as you can tell by looking at this little one, it's seen better days. And I think what's going on is it's grown so much that it's quite removed from its pot. So this one's going to go in straight pumice. And the reason I've decided to put this into pumice is because of my Sarracenia. Now, I got this from a similar company here in WA, and I will apologize. I need to pull way back and move some stuff around to see this one. But it is planted in very tiny pumice. And now I have yet to grow a successful, I don't know what you call them, pitcher. So I got it with these, and no pitcher. The one it had dried up. But since spring, it has shot out this massive thing. Now it's growing this, and it's growing that. So I'm assuming that these carnivores will appreciate the small grade pumice. Now I am going to point out that I've never repotted a carnivorous plant before, but as you can see from this one, it needs some intervention. It still seems to be growing okay, but just that stalk it's sort of grown up upon has got me a bit confused, and I'm worried about it because the new little traps are coming out much smaller. They're turning brown very quickly, and to me that says needs something. So we're going to attempt to repot this one. Now, as you can see, these are sort of boggy plants, so I do have it constantly sitting in a bit of RO water, and these things don't like any nutrient at all in their water, so the plainest, boringest water you can give them is what they like. So I'm just going to kind of give it a bit of a squeeze. Now I did put some sphagnum in here to try to help keep everything wet when I first got this, because it just was drying out really quickly. And then I realized, oh yeah, pot of water. So I'm just going to kind of give it a bit of a squeeze and a bit of a pull and just kind of dig down in there. I'm not sure how well rooted these guys are, but I can feel what feels like breaking roots as I'm pulling, so I'm a bit worried about that. But we'll go on. Alrighty, so not too shabs there. Okay, well, the root system on this one doesn't seem to look too bad, I wouldn't guess. I do think that I'm going to attempt to trim off some of these dead bits and sink it down a little bit deeper into its pot. So I am going to rinse this dirt, because this is actual soil, off of here. And we'll get this out of there as well too. Now we're just going to go over to the sink and give everything a bit of a rinse. All right, so we've got it kind of rinsed off, and you can see it looks like these have more standard looking plant roots. There's still a little bit of this material in here which looks like maybe some spag moss, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. What I am going to do is cut off all these little dead pieces. Now this is the sundew that I've had in my collection the longest, and I got it, like I said, at an orchid fair from the Good Life Soil Company. And I think if anything is wrong with this one, it's the owner's fault, not the plant's fault. As I have learned quite a bit on caring for these ones since I've gotten this. They like it wet, they like it very wet, and they like a lot of highlight. Now I do not go and feed these plants. I don't like catch little bugs. I do find that in Western Australia we have quite a bit enough of the little fungus gnats and things that occur anytime you bring bananas or fruit into the house. So I do find that they get plenty of little bugs, which is why I'm not going to which is why I don't feed it. Okay, so I think I've got this one with most of the little deady bits off. And now the plan here is, as you can see, there's quite a bit of this stalk that hasn't been growing, and it's just been sitting up, I think, way too high for the humidity that this plant needs. So I'm actually going to bury it to there, in here. And yes, I am reusing the same pot. The reason I'm doing that is these are bog-loving plants, and I don't think it's going to mind it. So the difference it's getting today is it's going to be having the smallest grit. And I'm just going to pour it right on in here. And then we're just going to hope for the absolute best. That's about the level I want it. And just a little bit right through there. And now we're going to call this one good. So quite happy with a little repot on this one. It's not got so much of its stalk sticking out. And so either one of two things is going to happen. Either I've killed it, or it's going to be happy to be in a bit better seated position within its pot to access the humidity and the water. So I am going to put it back in its same growing position. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run water through here until my pot is about halfway full. And then I'll just continue to refill it with water as I see the reservoir empties. So okay, our next victim or experiment, or whatever you would like to call it, is this little guy. Now, this little guy has been putting out some really nice roots. And as I mentioned, I watered this on Saturday, and I haven't tipped this pot at all, but I have a water reservoir here, and you can see that I watered it on Saturday, and it's Monday morning, and this little buddy has already drank all of the fluid that's in, all the water that's in the bottom of his cup. Yes, this is a cup. I got this at Kmart. It's a clear melamine cup, and they sell these at Kmart's in Australia for a 4-pack of them for $6. So $1.25 a cup. That's something I can do. But again, because of supply chain issues coming into Western Australia, these are getting a bit hard to find, pretty spotty on when they're in stock. So what's the deal with that? Okay, so the deal with supply chain issues that I've mentioned in my last video and I'm mentioning here are pretty simple. COVID has caused havoc around the world for the last 2 years. Western Australia is pretty remote. Most of the Australian population lives over east in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, and so that means, and Australian Capital Territory. So that means people in Northern Territory and Perth, everything we get in here, most all of everything is shipped from over east or from other countries. Perth is, if I remember correctly, the most isolated capital city on the planet. Yeah, there you go. The most isolated capital city on the planet. So for me here in Perth, if I wanted to hop onto an airplane and go over east, it will actually take me longer to fly from Perth to Sydney than it takes me to fly from Perth to Bali. So if you guys want to know why Perthlings tend to holiday in Bali, that's because it's a 2 to 3 hour plane flight, whereas going anywhere else within Australia is a 3 to 4 hour, 5 hour plane flight. So logistically speaking and time-wise, that's why Australians in Western Australia tend to holiday in Bali. And that's why everything here is getting more difficult to come by and it's getting more expensive. So you'll also notice that I'm going to treat these two plants differently. You can see that this one has got quite thick roots and that one has got quite thin roots. You can see that these were both watered on Saturday, and this one, if we turn it over, is still pouring water out. There's still water in the reservoir. So it's thirsty, but not nearly as thirsty as this one. And both of these were planted in this bark with some of the, we'll just call it the beginning of the bad bark saga here in Western Australia. So I'm going to treat these two slightly differently than I did the bigger Piercii yesterday. So this one is going to have nothing in it, but the bottom dressing is going to be the 4 to 20 millimeter size bark, and the rest of this cup is going to be filled up with our little tiny sandy gritty bark. I'm interested to see how the roots on this one are going to be looking inside the pot, because I'm noticing on this one that it's really almost needing water on the Wednesday, Saturdays, because on some of the hotter days we've been having coming up, I do find that in only a day or two it's drinking its water reservoir down, and then it just sort of gets a bit floppy, and then I give it some more water and it perks right back up. So that's why I'm going to try the smallest pumice with this one, and with this one I'm going to do the bottom layer with the 4 to 20 millimeter size pumice, and then I'm going to do a mixture of the small and the medium sized pumice in this pot here. So that's what we're going to do with these two. So I've also sterilized my scissors, even though they don't look sterile, they're old beat up scissors. So these were my kitchen scissors, and as you can tell, they've seen better days. So now they're my orchid scissors. And again, we're repotting here in the kitchen on the dining room table, and got my trusted old cookie sheet to collect all the debris. So I'm a bit worried about this setup because, as you can tell, these plastic cups aren't real squishy, but I do like their aesthetic. So I'm just going to give it a dump over and see what we can get out of there. I'll say again, the roots are looking like it's quite happy and beautiful growing tips here. And again, we're just going to kind of fiddle and play with these to try to get these out. As you can see, the media that's in the pot is still nice and wet. It just has already drank the reservoir from the bottom. So I wish that there was a way for me to bring up the layer, but I've already poked the holes, so we're committed to the water reservoir layer with this one. And this looks like a real good way to clean your orchids of bark. But hey, you know, it's working. So we'll see what we can do. Like I said, we've got some really nice roots in here that I don't want to damage. And I'm doing these while these are wet because it does seem like the roots tend to come away from the plastic cups a bit easier when they're wet than when they're dry. So they do seem to release quite well from this plastic melamine cup, which makes me a happy camper. So again, like the last time, the little bits of river rock that I have in here, I'm going to keep these aside for a top layer dressing. So now I'm going to kind of do the fiddly bits of pulling the river rock out of the bottom. Now what we can see here is what appears to be a pretty nice root system. I'm just going to give this a little bit of a soak to see if we can't loosen up some of these little pieces of bark. I'd like to get as much of this off as possible. As I mentioned, we're going to put this into Inorganic, so I don't want the bark breaking down and degrading the new setup. And it really looks like a lot of these roots are pretty darn good. This one's a bit squishy. That one's a bit squishy. This one's definitely a goner. Like I said, I think this is a good time to do it as we've got these new roots growing. So I'm not sure how much of these are dead because they just didn't like the setup, and how much of these, well, that I'm pulling off are just the old dead ones that were here to begin with. Considering their location coming from here, I'm going to say that these were the original roots to the plant, and the ones that I've grown on are the longer ones, and those do seem to be quite healthy plant roots. And I do say that with the bark media, the damper or the more moist the bark is, the easier it is that it releases from your roots. So the roots and the velamen swell, as does the bark media. Now this is interesting because that's actually grown through a crevice in that piece of bark. And we'll just break that piece of bark in half because it just does so quite so easily. And that was the case that this bag, I'd say 25% of this bag was like that when I got it, just very easy to break. So it was quite arduous to go through all of these little pieces to find the ones that were good. And then, like I said, just with the bark situation here, each progressive bag I got, the amount of good bark became, 20%, 10%, 5%, and I just quit buying it. Okay, so after we've gotten the roots all cleaned up, I can say that I'm pretty happy with this root system. We've got all sorts of new little growing tips growing, new roots growing. So I think, again, this is the ideal opportunity to switch this one over into inorganic media. As that root looks kind of browny, it's still firm, so I'm leaving it. Now, one thing about this plant, these roots here at the bottom were originally sitting in the water, so I'm going to leave it like that, to where that they're sitting within the water reservoir. And I'm going to have it potted to about that level in the pot. And again, I'm going to keep the drainage holes to the back of the plant and try to have it set up like this, so the label will come in the back of the plant right here where the two drainage holes are. And as I mentioned, I'm going to start off with the slightly larger bark down at the bottom. Now, Nina has always mentioned that with these kind of heavier bark pieces compared to, or the heavier rock pieces compared to the bark, to try to use some water to help mitigate the damage it's doing to these roots. And since I'm going to be having them fall directly onto these, I'm going to attempt something. Okay, so as you can see, what I've done here is I've put some water in here so that there's water about halfway through the top of the cup. And the hope is that I'm going to gently drop the pumice stones so that they can kind of float down, as opposed to banging down heavily. And again, like I said, I'm just going to do this part here to cover the drainage holes. But I am going to put a little bit of the big stuff in that big hole right there, because I'm not 100% certain just exactly how wet and or wicking this pumice is. This is experimental for me, but we'll show you here. So we've got the 4 to 20 millimeter kind of up through here. I filled in a bit through the middle where there's no roots going on. The rest of this is going to be filled with this fine gravel. Now, and again, I'm quite happy with the results of this plant in this bark setup, but again, I'm having issues getting the bark. The quality of the bark is going downhill. I've been watching some YouTubers that grow with inorganic media, and they don't have the problems of acidification and media breakdown. So I thought, well, give it a go. Well, this is a pretty nice idea, because then I can catch the media that I'm dropping, and I'll be able to salvage that as well. And I'm really happy with the aesthetic of this, the look of this. I think it goes nice with the aesthetic of my home. And that's the thing with frag roots, is they don't like to be exposed to air. So there is always that happy sweet spot that you take your frags and your potting media up to. And that is where you can see that first leaf joint is now. I have a bit of a root right there, so I'm just going to push that down a little bit more into the media. And give a little bit of a plop to it right here. Now, I am quite tickled with how this is turning out. I'm going to give everything a bit of a push down into it, and maybe just a little tiny bit of a misting of smaller pumice here. So we're going to give just a little bit of the top dressing layer of these native Western Australian river stones that were in the bottom of this container and now are in the top. I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. A, it's supposedly going to help keep the humidity levels in the humus, and I've just spilled my coffee. So supposed to keep the humidity levels within the humus, or I'm sorry, the pumice, not the humus, within the pumice. So I'm going to have to finish this up real quick and deal with my spilled coffee because it's currently running all over my floor and I don't want Happy to eat it. And there's our drainage holes. So I didn't quite get that quite as well as I wanted it. I wanted the plant a bit more centered like this with the drainage holes, but that's okay. The tag can go right back there. So there we have Fragkavakia. All right, so I've drained the water out of the reservoir, and now it's going to be time to get this one out. As I can see, I think it's good timing because we've got good, strong growing root tips. So either what I'm going to do is kill everything or not. But again, you can see that I've got a nice root growing all the way down here into the water reservoir. This one is used to sitting in water, so I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the other one, and that this root will remain down here at the bottom where it was originally. So again, we're just going to invert the pot, try to get as much of this media out as possible without damaging any of the roots. I'm quite hopeful. It does seem to me like the roots, even the ones that are touching, ooh, look at that root tip right there. Perfect timing. Perfect timing for this. So like I said, I am quite happy that the roots do seem to let go of these melamine containers quite easily. Bonus. Let's be very careful with this root. Now, we can see that this root system looks really good. This was one of these that I got from the local nursery. And again, local nursery has been having a hard time getting staff. So the poor staff members that are there are really overwhelmed with what they have to do. So the recent purchases I've made from them, the root system have been all quite very poor. And they've all come to me in a very setback, unhappy position. And this one had this root on it when I got it. That was it. And so we've grown all of these in the year that I've had it and put it in this pot. So I can say they do seem to really like this setup. So I might be doing something completely wrong by putting these into a different potting setup, but now is the time to do it. New growths, growing root tips. And again, I'd like to point out that with your slipper orchids, their roots are very rigid, they're fuzzy, and they're brown. Some of them are big, fat honkers like this one, and some of them have little skinny roots, but they're all quite fuzzy, and I like them because they're fuzzy and you can feel it. So this one, I'm going to say super duper happy with how it's responded. Unfortunately, it's the smell and the acidity that's happening with the bark media that I just don't think is going to be good in the long run. So we're swapping it over. Okay, again, as you can see, what we're going to do is Nina's idea in that there's going to be a bit of a water barrier here for this. And that's mostly to protect the growing root tips. As you can see, this is cleaned up quite nicely. I'm just going to give it a quick rinse under the sink. Okay, so as I mentioned, this root here was used to growing on the bottom of the pot. So I'm just going to leave it sitting there like that. And as I mentioned, this one has larger roots. So I'm going to go with a mixture of the small and the medium-sized bark. And we're going to hope we don't hurt that root tip there or here. But I am just going to fill it up completely with this medium-sized pumice. I keep saying bark, sorry, that's force of habit. Pumice. to about that level, so I've got a bit more that I need to put in. And that seems to have worked a treat. So that really did seem to work a treat. We've got that root all the way down here where it was before. I've got it set up nicely that the holes are going to line up with the tag, come centered from the back. So I'm real happy with that. So I think I'm going to give it just a little tiny bit more of the larger size bark underneath here. And then I'm going to do alternating layers of this size bark with the, or I'm sorry, this size, I keep calling it bark, this size pumice with the smaller, sandier, grittier pumice. So this pumice here reminds me of some of the sand, if you will, on some of the beaches I've been to in Europe. That sand is quite rocky, whereas the sand here is quite fine grade sand. So there we go. So like I said, we're going to do alternating layers of the bigger pumice and the smaller pumice. And I'm just kind of winging it. There's absolutely no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing other than I'm winging it based off of watching some other YouTube presenters that grow inorganically, mainly Nina over at Ninja Orchids, because Nina grows quite extensively in inorganic media, and she does pick through her different leca and pumice sizes to coordinate the needs of the individual plant, and I like that she does that. As well, the Orchid Saga, he's kind of the one that gave me the inspiration to use the pumice, because it's kind of hard to find leca here, and I just think that the pumice aesthetic works better for my aesthetic, and that's all there is to this, really. I'm being a bit selfish in regards to my orchid care, and I'm sticking with the aesthetic of my home because I grow in my house. These plants are feature and part and parcel of my home decor, if you will, and I'd like to keep everything consistent and pretty, and again, not smelly, because these were starting to have smells to them that I was not appreciating. And again, halves and frags do not like their roots exposed to air, and there's that sweet spot, and we're coming up to that sweet spot with this one right here before much longer, but you can see where the roots are coming out. So I kind of try to angle it to right about just above where the roots are coming out. I anticipate that I'm going to lose this bottom leaf here. That seems to be the case as new roots form. However, I'm just going to leave that root as it is, because for now it's fine. So the last little bit I'm going to put on is going to again be this very tiny pumice, and then I'm going to top dress everything with some of that pretty decorative river stones. And you know, putting this little container of water right here is actually really convenient, because it's catching a lot of the stuff that I'm missing, and I'll be able to drain that out and reuse those. So that's making me quite happy, quite happy. All right, so as you can see that we've got this planted to where the roots are pretty well covered. A little bit more right through here to cover these ones up. There is that magic sweet spot, as I mentioned, where you want to keep the roots covered but not too high so you get stem rot. So I think I have achieved that with this one. Very happy with that. Just let that water drain out there. And dry the hands off. Got a little bit of pumice right there. there, there, and here. Now we'll just give it some pretty top layer of nice, pretty stones. And again, this is supposed to help keep the humidity in and maybe keep the fungus gnats out. So I'm not sure if what was going on in my other pot was fungus gnat larvae, or if it's thrips larvae, or if it was just a centipede. But yeah, I don't want to have that crawling around my head. And we have this one done. So what I'm just going to do, because the rocks were a bit wet, is I'm just going to kind of dab right through here, because I do see that there's some water. It is quite early of a Monday morning, and since I'm finding myself between jobs right now, to keep myself busy and otherwise occupied until I start my new position. Until I start my new position. I've taken a head sonography company, so I'll be the head sonographer for a company here in town that has 3 clinics. Plus I'll get my own sonography students, and I feel that that's the best for my career right now. Anytime you can get upper management and a nice little pay packet increase, it's always nice to jump ship. And yeah, about a year ago, before I started the job I just quit, this company contacted me and wanted me, but at that time I had just signed on with the one I just left. And yeah, so we're starting that. So I've got a little bit of time off between gigs, and for that time we're going to be repotting some of my orchids that need it into inorganic media. Well, there you have it. 3 repots. 1 carnivorous repot, 1 Phragmipedium repot, 1 Paphiopedilum repot. So again, I'd like to thank you for watching. If you're interested in growing in inorganic media, particularly with leca and self-watering, I can highly suggest Nina over at Ninja Orchids. If you're more interested in the look of pumice stones and rock, follow me and see how everything responds after our organic to inorganic transitioning. Another one I can suggest is the Orchid Saga, as he grows all in inorganic with pumice and rock. So there you have it. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up. A subscribe would be nice. And everyone have a happy, healthy, safe Monday. Thank you again.